We're live. Welcome, everybody, to the This Is Not Therapy Hour. I'm Brandon Tessers. I'm a licensed therapist, but this is not therapy for so very, very many reasons. This is just a conversation. It's just an open session, an open forum. I don't know what words I'm trying to say. It's just me being here to talk to whoever else wants to be here. I'm trying to make things accessible and remove barriers to access as much as possible. So we're here to talk. Uh, every week we pick a topic to discuss, and we have one for today, but this really is about you guys who are here. And so those of you who are watching this but not in the chat, or those of you who are watching this after the fact, as a VOD, I appreciate you, and I am doing my best to make my guesses about who you might be and what you might be interested in hearing about. And for those of you who are in the chat, I love it. Thank you so much for giving me some more information about who you are and what you're interested in hearing about, so I don't have to guess quite as much. It's a lot more fun that way. I run a therapy and executive functioning coaching practice called Effective Artistry. That's our logo up there in the corner. We do individual therapy, couples, family, group therapy. We're a couple weeks into our parenting neurodiversity affirming parenting group. In addition to that, we also have executive functioning coaches that are separate from therapists that do executive functioning coaching work. And I don't know, we could talk about all that stuff. Actually, one thing I'll put out there is we have an intern therapist. So if you are in the state of Illinois and you're looking for services and don't have insurance, don't have the resources, we are taking people onto the wait list to work with our intern. So please reach out to us and let us know. I think that's the basics of it. I apologize for being a few minutes late. It's a busy day, and I don't always manage my time well, as any repeat viewers know. Our topic today is social anxiety. And just to reiterate, if you're here and you're in the chat, we go where you go. This is a conversation. Like any conversation, I am impacted by the things that you do and say, the things that I think and the things that I do and the things that I say are changed in response to what you're doing, what you're saying, or the elements of it that I can observe. So that means if we go off topic, in terms of the social anxiety topic that we're choosing to, we'll go wherever. Those of you who are here get priority, which, is unfortunate in some elements because not everyone could be here at this time. I'm trying to figure out how I can make it available to different people, but we are where we are. Did I say all of that stuff? Yeah, whatever. We'll get on with it. So topic today, social anxiety. Margaret, who has been generating our topics for us and getting questions, put that out there and got us some questions. And do I want to say anything about the topic before looking at the questions specifically? No, I'm going to look at the questions. Difference between social anxiety versus agoraphobia. Interesting. I'm going to read all the questions. What do you think is the cause of social anxiety in extroverted people who suddenly have social anxiety? What interventions can help me slowly get back into being comfortable in social situations where I don't know people? What interventions can help me be comfortable in social situations where I do know the people, but I'm scared I will still be judged by those closest to me? How can I get an entry-level job if I have extreme social anxiety and cannot seem to work with any other people? Do I need to see a therapist who specializes in social anxiety in order to get the best therapeutic treatment? Interesting questions. Let's talk about social anxiety. Well, let's talk about anxiety, first of all. You know me, I like to define our terms. So anxiety is an experience of distress, right? Distress is kind of a catch-all phrase that we use for any negative internal experience. When I say internal, I mean you have your internal your thoughts, your emotions, your interpretations, intentions, perceptions, your desires. All that stuff happens on the inside. Nobody else can observe it. And you can communicate those things. You can use spoken language or any type of language. You can use body language, which I don't like that we use language for, the word language in that phrase, but you can do things to communicate to other people what is happening inside of you, but it's still all that stuff is happening on the inside. If what's happening in there is inherently unpleasant, distressing, we call it, it's distressing. We're talking about not a physical sensation of pain, but an internal subjective sensation of discomfort, pain, or distress is the word that we use. So anxiety is a particular type of distress. And like any other thing, language is a living thing, and different words mean different things to different people. Even when there are clear and accepted, like official definitions of something, that thing still means something different to different people, including even if both people are trying to use it in the way that it is officially defined. It's still going to have different connotations for different people. I'm trying to put stuff out there because these kinds of questions, and we get these kinds of questions a lot, is really people over focusing on accuracy, meaning, do I technically count as having social anxiety or not? Is this thing due to social anxiety, or is social anxiety due to this thing? All of that is fungible, it's changeable, it depends on what's going on with the person. And of course, that's not a very useful answer for me to just say, well, it depends, who knows? It depends. So we say it depends, but then we give some thoughts that are general and, the things that we think might be most common. Just as a side note, this is a pattern of my communication that really causes me problems. In that when people ask a question, I don't ever know the answer to the question, because how could I know the answer to, like, how do I get better at blah, blah, blah? I don't know, but that's not useful. So I say the things that I know that I think might be useful. Well, have you considered this? Or here's a framework, or this is a piece of information that might be helpful to you, or take a closer look at what's happening in this particular thing and get back to me, whatever. And that'll often come across like I'm answering every question as though I know the answer to every question, because in a lot of cases in our culture, and this actually does relate to social anxiety, in a lot of cases in our culture, people don't talk unless they feel like they know what to say. I want to say more about that, but we'll maybe get into that more as we get into the social anxiety, because that's a big piece of it for a lot of people, is feeling like you don't know what the right thing to say is. And so you don't say anything at all, but then you worry that, well, now I'm not saying anything. Are they judging me for not saying anything? And therefore it should be good to say something, but I don't know what to say. And you just loop and loop. Anyway, so anxiety means different things to different people, but generally I think it's a useful way to talk about anxiety to say that there's a gap between different possibilities of what might happen. In other words, you're exploring something. So like, I might go to this party, I might say this thing right now, and you know that what might happen from there branches into different possibilities. Anxiety of text talking. Oh yeah, I hate asynchronous communication. Just to be clear, I hate writing emails. I hate texting. It's the worst. When we get to the extroverted one, actually, extroverted people will often have very intense social anxiety in certain contexts. Those things correlate. Anyway, so we're talking about something where we're considering multiple possibilities, right? If I say this, they could react this way, they could react this way, they could react this way, whatever. And the larger the gap between those possibilities, where one is the best or the one that I would hope for, and one is the worst or the one that I'm afraid of, the bigger the difference between those, the more important that thing is to us. At that point, it's about how confident we are that the good thing will happen or that the bad thing will be avoided. The way I find it most useful to talk about anxiety, generally speaking, if I'm not having an individual person and we can explore exactly what they're using the word to mean. So generally speaking, the way I find most useful to talk about anxiety is that it's a gap between how important it is to you that something go a particular way. Of all the options of how it could go, it's important to you that it go one way, or that it avoid going one way if we're talking about a fear. And the gap between that and how confident you are that it will go this way versus the other. So in other words, if I'm just going to slap some like ridiculously simple metaphor on this, but in other words, if I'm about to roll a dice, flip a coin, we'll make it real simple. If I'm about to flip a coin, it could be heads or tails. If it's heads, I win $1. If it's tails, I don't win anything. Well, that is a very unimportant thing. The difference between the better outcome and the worst outcome is I get $1 or I don't get $1. Not a big deal. So I'm going to flip it. And my confidence that I get the dollar is about 50-50 anyway. So definitely worth trying. But then if we start manipulating either side of that, things can change, right? that something that unimportant, even if it's a 1 in 100 shot, okay, I'll still take it, even if I'm very low confidence, because it's very low importance. It doesn't really matter if I don't get $1. Now, as soon as it switches to, okay, if I win, if I flip heads, I get $1. If I flip tails, I lose $1. Well, now 50-50, yeah, okay, maybe I'll still do that, But if I starts to shift even more, well, now what if it's a 1 out of 6 chance it's rolling a dice? Well, no, I'm not going to do that, because it's 5 times more likely that I lose $1 than I gain $1. So I'm not going to do it at all. Social anxiety is just a particular version of anxiety. So anxiety is when you're considering those things, when you're thinking about that, you're having relatively low confidence and relatively high importance on whatever the outcome is that you're considering. The larger that gap, the more anxiety you feel. Social anxiety is just that, but with social interaction. So in terms of what's the difference between social anxiety versus agoraphobia? Well, for one, agoraphobia is actually phobia, just to be clear, phobia means an irrational fear. In order for it to be considered a phobia, something that would theoretically be clinically relevant, the fear has to be irrational. So if I am afraid of a venomous snake, that's not irrational. If I am afraid of a picture of a snake, that might be irrational. Still not necessarily problematic. Does it really matter if I don't like pictures of snakes? Probably doesn't cause me that much of a problem, but maybe it does. It's worth addressing. But a phobia means the fear that you're experiencing in response to the stimuli is disproportionate, irrationally so, that you're way more scared than it's really that you need to be. And yeah, that there's subjective stuff there. But agoraphobia is fear of large places, large open spaces. And of course, it's morphed over time. And because agoraphobia often also means a fear of leaving the home, because large open public spaces, including outdoors, and then gets attached to social anxiety as well, like it's a fear of being around people, but it's not. I mean, of course, it can be. Part of agoraphobia is a fear of interacting with other people, or can be, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. You can be agoraphobic and still be totally fine with people coming into your house, for example. Social anxiety is not a fear, it's an anxiety. What a silly way to try and clarify that. So, social anxiety can be experienced when you are not socializing or when you are socializing, right? That I can be interacting with someone and be very anxious. I can even be interacting with someone in a way that everybody else thinks is very fluent and fluid, and that they'd be impressed and not have any suspicion that anything is weird or going differently with me on the inside. But on the inside, I'm anxious out of, a ridiculous level or an unsustainable level or whatever. A result of that can be that I avoid social situations because I'm predicting that when I am there, I will be anxious. So now I'm anxious about going there at all, getting involved in a social interaction at all. I don't know if that super clarifies the distinction. And again, I would say it doesn't really matter. What matters is what's the term that's more useful to you. Do you consider yourself agoraphobic, or do you think that you're struggling with social anxiety? Or socially anxious? I guess I could have used identity first language for both of those concepts. But that would be kind of the technical distinction between the two. What do I think is the cause of social anxiety in extroverted people who suddenly have social anxiety? All right. Importance, right? Importance and competence. If you are extroverted, that quite likely means that you pay close attention to other people and their responses to you. That yes, you are energized by interacting with other people, but only if those interactions are going in a way that you like, that are energizing to you. If they go poorly, extroverts can be hit just as hard as introverts. I'm trying to decide whether to talk about extrovert, introvert, because let's talk about that. Because it's something that people think about and talk about a lot, and I think. So just to be clear, the original extrovert-introvert distinction, first of all, this is not like grounded in good, solid psychological research. Of course, stuff has been done since then. But the original distinction was not so much about do you enjoy interacting with other people or not. It was do you process internally or externally? Like, do you process cognitively or verbally, through interacting with others? And of course, that's shifted over time. Now, at least from my perspective, it seems like the most commonly accepted definition of introvert versus extrovert is that introverts are drained by social interaction, where extroverts are energized by social interaction. And what I'll say is that's not true. It can't be. I don't care how introverted or extroverted you are. Some social interactions will drain you and some will energize you. It depends. Now, there's definitely likelihoods and probabilities, right? That for some people, the vast, vast majority of social interaction is very draining, and only very specific and small, certain social interactions can be energizing. Whereas for other people, the majority of social interactions can be energizing in a small number. But all of us exist somewhere in there. And I'm trying to clarify that because oftentimes if people will identify it as like a static thing, I am drained by social interaction or I am energized by social interaction, we get into trouble with questions like this. An extroverted person who's all of a sudden saying, this is a draining social interaction. What's going on? Something must be wrong because usually I'm energized. Yeah, we could say that something's going wrong, but it's not like something's broken or weird or bad in you. It's just the context of this interaction is different. If you are interviewing for a job that you really, really want, that you think is perfect and amazing, and it's a once in a lifetime opportunity, and you show up and the interviewer is not giving you a lot of good feedback, you're interpreting that they're not liking the things that you're saying, that's going to feel bad. Doesn't matter whether you're extroverted, introverted, whatever, you're going to be drained by that in this hypothetical scenario. Whereas on the flip side, extroverted, introverted, whatever, if your best friend or the person you most like in the world comes to you and brings you your favorite food for dinner and says, let's do your favorite activity together, and genuinely enjoys it and gets into it with you, and then they'll be energized by that. It's about enjoyment. Do you enjoy social interaction or not? And yeah, there are tendencies. I don't really like to talk about it in terms of personality. I think that's a flawed construct. There are tendencies, there are likelihoods. But we can't say how much of that is about you, the individual, versus the environment that you're in. Meaning, like, if I'm a kid, if I'm in high school, right, and I am somebody who struggles to keep deadlines and track the things that I'm trying to do, is that going to impact me? Yeah, a lot, because that's asked for a lot in high school. And if it's a struggle for me, I'm going to struggle with it a lot. Whereas if I'm somebody who struggles with skiing, is that going to impact me? Probably not. You don't have to go skiing if you don't want to, right? Like, nobody's forcing you to. And even if there are cool opportunities to go skiing that you miss out on, yeah, that's an impact, but it's not as impactful as frequently as if you're struggling with the stuff that you need to do in school every single day, right? So I want people to pay attention to that, because that's the answer to this question. What is the cause of social anxiety in extroverted people who suddenly have social anxiety? It's something about that social interaction. Something about that social interaction, the one that is making them anxious, is making them less confident that they'll be able to get it going the way they want it to go, and or making it more important that it go the way they want it to go, meaning that the difference between it going well and it going poorly is getting bigger and bigger. That's why a job interview is really important. If it goes well, I get my dream job. If it goes poorly, I don't. That's a big difference for a person, generally speaking. Whereas, the delivery person bringing the food that I ordered or whatever, if that interaction goes well, if that interaction goes poorly, the distinction between those two things is not as big as I get a job or I don't, right? So in which circumstances are you getting socially anxious? Who are the people? What are the stakes? What is it that you're worried might happen if it doesn't go well? Because anxiety, one of the big problems with it, one of the little known fact, well, I don't know, maybe it's not a little known fact. Maybe it's a very, very widely known fact. Anxiety is by far the most common symptom that brings people to therapy. I think most people would guess depression, but anxiety is by far the most common. Depression is number two. Anxiety cycles really badly. I don't want to imply that depression doesn't. It does as well. But because, especially with social anxiety, I just kind of talked through a very common version of it is, how do I phrase this to make sure that they interpret it the way that I want them to interpret it, as opposed to the way that I'm worried that they might interpret it? Or if I say this, they might love it or they might hate it. Or if I make this joke, they might think it's hilarious or they might not get it and think I'm a jerk or whatever, right? What is it that you're thinking about matters, and how confident are you in your ability to read and respond to things? So I am very, very extroverted. And in large part, that has to do with I am very confident in my ability to read what people want if I get to talk to them face to face synchronously. This is part of the reason that asynchronous communication destroys me. And this is very common for extroverted people. Because I'm extroverted, I'm energized because I am reality testing. That's what we're doing when we're talking to people, meaning we're sharing thoughts and ideas and we're seeing how, if I tell a joke and somebody laughs, now I know that that joke is funny to at least some people, where when it was in my head, it seemed funny to me, but I don't know if it's really funny or not. Until I put it out there, I can't know. And this stuff gets junked up in your working memory. You come up with all these thoughts and ideas. You ever rehearse a conversation with somebody? Okay, I'm going to say this, and then what if they say that? And what if I say this, and then I'll say that, and then blah, blah. That takes up all this room in there. And until you utilize it, it makes everything else harder because you don't have as many resources available to pay attention to any of the other things that you need to be doing. So if you're confident in your ability to navigate those contexts, to do that kind of communication and get through it okay, then yeah, you want to talk a lot because it frees this stuff up. It is energizing. It makes you feel better because you've kind of cleared all that stuff out, that backlog of stuff. Of course, there's lots of things that you can think about that don't need to be talked about with people, right? Like you can think about how to play a video game or a painting you want to make, and etc. But yeah, this is why introvert, extrovert, I don't think is the most useful way of distinguishing people. I think it's more useful to talk about what kinds of social interaction do you like, what do you not like. So I'm an extrovert, sure, because that's a way of saying that on balance, predictably, I'm going to enjoy a social interaction with a person. Much more likely that I enjoy social interaction with a person than that I don't. And I have tons of socially anxious interactions with people. And I will say more so over the past couple of years. I think part of that is definitely that I've been very isolated since the beginning of the pandemic. I think that's true for a lot of people, which doesn't mean that you're worse at socializing necessarily. It means that you're more specialized. That theoretically, if before the start of the pandemic, my wife and I, our interactions with each other were 20% of our total interactions with people. But then afterwards, our interactions with each other were 60% of our total interactions with people. It means we become more specialized in interacting one with another. And then when we go interact with other people, our sense of how to interact with general people doesn't seem as right as it used to be when we'd interact with a lot more people more frequently. I don't think I'm being super clear, but I also don't want to take the time to be more clear. This is where I wish I had people here responding right now on how clear this is or isn't. So it could be that. It could be that you're specialized. It could be that for some reason it's more important, or that you're less confident. That could be, wow, this person, every time I interact with them, they seem to take something that I say and get really hurt by it. So I got to be very careful not to offend them. And that what's offensive or not can become socially anxious. So I was talking before about it. Cycling is, okay, well, could be this, could be that. Let me think about it. I've been thinking about it a while. Now it looks like I don't know what to say, or now they think I'm being awkward. I really better say something now. But at this point, 5 seconds has passed, so it's got to be good, whatever I say. And plus, if I say something now, they're going to think that I was very thoughtful and deep about it. So I better make sure that it sounds good, because if they think that I took 10 seconds to come up with, that's not going to be cool, right? It cycles and makes it worse. So that can be for extroverted people, introverted people, whatever. Doesn't matter. Look at the specifics. Don't worry about whether you're an extrovert or an introvert. That's my brief answer. Could have gotten there faster, I guess. What interventions can help me slowly get back into being comfortable in social situations where I don't know people? Well, as a broad thing, this is just anything that you're doing, but specifically, especially over the past few years, again, a lot of people became more uncomfortable in larger social situations with people that they don't know as well. First of all, I was going to say titrate it, but that's a word that almost nobody knows what it means. What I mean is test yourself. Go and do it, see how you experience it, but in a safe way so that you can leave whenever you need to. If you're saying, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this or if I'll be comfortable, give it a shot and just know that you can leave. You can drive halfway there and turn around and be like, nope, never mind. You can get all the way there, hang out for 3 minutes and be gone. You could get out of the car, see how many people are there and be like, no, never mind, and leave. Or you could be there for 4 hours. Just pay attention, check in with yourself through the moment to moment. And when you are feeling too drained or too uncomfortable, leave. And now you've got a baseline. And now you experiment from there. You try again if it's something you want to try again and see, can I go a little bit longer this time than I did before? Or if I hang out with these people or in this context, can I go longer than I did before? Can I be more comfortable than I was before? You just slowly test it and be very safe about being able to leave when you need to. Interesting. I've been worrying a lot lately about how to deal with resistance to change. Like I know things that help me work on the things that I want to get done, but a part of me doesn't want to be doing anything. So I avoid the things that help. I just feel so stuck. All right. I'm going to tie this together a little bit with the social anxiety thing we're talking about. Emotion is something that you experience internally. And as emotion becomes more intense, your ability to control how you express that emotion decreases. Meaning, I'm a very calm and consistent and, I don't raise my voice a lot person. But if I get sad, I don't have to start crying right away. But if I get sad enough, I'm going to start crying. My ability to mask that, to hide from somebody else that I am sad, diminishes as the experience gets more and more intense. So sometimes things like this, part of me doesn't want to be doing anything. Sometimes, and I'm trying to describe it that way because I want to be clear that this isn't like cry for help thing. There are some times that you're stuck on things because you need help on it, but you don't want to get help on it. So you don't tell anybody that you're struggling. And it gets worse because you needed help. You can't do it on your own, but you don't want to tell anybody. So it gets worse. You don't want to tell anybody. It gets worse. You don't want to tell anybody. It gets worse until sooner or later, they just notice because your ability to hide it from people has disappeared. It's gotten, so sometimes a part of me doesn't want to be doing anything, depending on what that means. Sometimes that is your emotion. I guess it's more, if I say it as, I think of emotion as a kind of social safety release valve, right? That consciously you might not want anybody to know that you're struggling because humans often don't want other people to know that we're struggling. It's a display of vulnerability and it's unsafe, right? Unless we're in an environment and with people that we trust and we're safe with. And even then we might not want to do it because then we feel like we're a burden. We feel like we should be able to handle it on our own or whatever. But I think we have evolved with this emotional expression as a way to basically, at certain points, prefrontal cortex shutdown, fight or flight, whatever you want to talk about, that we have processes in place that make sure that no matter what, even if we're like, no, don't let anybody know, they're going to know sooner or later. We lose the ability to hold that back. Sometimes part of me doesn't want to be doing anything is really just, I am sad and I'm tired. And I shouldn't have said that. And I shouldn't have said it with such emotion because I actually am sad and tired today. And that started to open some stuff up on a stream, which is not where it needs to be happening. But sometimes that's what it is. It's just, I don't know. I know I could do this. I know I could do that. I know it would be good. I just can't. I don't want to. Forget it. I don't want it. one way of thinking about that is that it is your processes that make sure that you don't push yourself in a way that's going to hurt you, even if it seems like a good idea, and that you're communicating to other people, hey, something's wrong with me, please check in. I know that depending on which perspective you take, right, which person in the interaction you're thinking about, we can talk about the same things in a way that makes it sound terrible or sound terrible that anyone would think it sounds terrible. And this is one of those things like the silent treatment, for example. Obviously, we can talk about giving someone the silent treatment as weaponizing silence. And we can talk about how it even can be abusive because people can be abusive with it. We can also talk about maybe somebody has been trying to explain something, trying to get somebody's attention, trying to say, hey, I'm really struggling with this thing in ways that they think make sense and they think are being clear, and it's just not happening. So at a certain point, they just shut down and stop trying. And then the stopping trying is in and of itself the signal that the other person actually gets. Like, normally you're coming at me over and over trying to tell me about something that you don't like about what I'm doing or whatever. And now you're not talking to me. What's wrong? What's going on? That disruption in the pattern can be a signal to people that something is wrong. I'm using all these words because I really want to avoid anybody walking away from this thinking like, oh, if you're sad, that's a cry for help. Because, like, while I technically think that's true, I don't think that's true in the way that cry for help is typically used as a phrase. In other words, people just generally think that we are all in control of everything that we do. And that sucks. That definitely plays into the social anxiety, right? That an exercise I do with people a lot. Go ahead and say anything you want. You can say it out loud. You can do it in your head, whatever. Anything you want. Tell a story about a thing that happened. Talk about whatever. The only rule is you have to think about each word consciously before you use it. And if you do that for about 2 seconds, you'll notice that's not how you normally speak. Which, what does that mean? That you don't consciously choose even your own words. Of course you don't. I'm saying way too many words. If I had to think about, I didn't think about before I said it. It's hard. That's not how it works. Not to mention, I have to stop paying attention to it. My eyes literally unfocus and I look away so I can focus on the cognitive space. When we're talking, we're focusing on the other people that we're talking to. We don't know what words we're using until we use them. Try recording yourself speaking and then see if you can say, oh, I said this word for word, verbatim. You can't, of course not, because you're not hearing or remembering every word that you're using. So part of what social anxiety can be is we do have this ability, we call it being careful, to take conscious control over something. I can think about all my words before I use any of them. And it can be much more fluid if I pause and think through a phrase before saying anything. Being careful means something that normally just happens automatically. I'm just writing my handwriting. I can be careful and exert more conscious effort at the cost of paying attention to anything else and do it in a very particular way. A lot of social anxiety is that it's okay, be careful. You're not safe. There's a big difference between good and bad outcomes here. So put conscious effort into it and it slows you down. I'll finish that last question. There was another comment I want to come back to, but that one interventions can help me slowly get back because that titrating one is a good general one. But with social anxiety in general, the best thing that you can do is learn how to identify and repair miscommunications. That the social anxiety is if this person gets the wrong impression of me or thinks of me a certain way, or I give the wrong answer or use the wrong word or whatever, then they're going to dislike me or that will cause me Sorry about that, everybody. Somehow the power strip that the router at our office is plugged into got turned off. I don't know how, but we're back. I apologize. I can't see the comments from before. And there was that most recent comment about being sad and tired that I had wanted to respond to, but I can't see it. If you're still here and willing to, I would appreciate you putting it back into the chat again. And goblins, yeah. And I should have clarified earlier that we're not talking about social anxiety disorder. We're talking about the experience of social anxiety. I try not to talk about disorders on stream generally. I'm sad and tired and stressed all the time, but it's been that way for as long as I can remember, trying to work towards getting to a better place, but feel stymied. Everything's so hard. Yeah, that sucks. And of course, you're not alone in that experience. That doesn't make it any better. Without getting into specific details, which we should not do on a stream because this is not therapy, without getting into specific details, I would say, number one, be very clear with yourself. It doesn't matter if anybody else understands what you mean, but be clear with yourself about the difference between sad, tired, stressed, whatever other language you would use to describe the experience you're talking about. This is a generic suggestion because I don't want to get specific in a public place. That's not therapy. Identify what the opposite of that is. So let's start with sad, and you define what sad means for you as opposed to tired or whatever else. Check in with, what do you feel in your body when you're sad? What do you think when you're sad, right? Identify what would be on the opposite end, and we'll just say happy, but you use whatever language you would use, and identify a scale to use between those two things. Yes, this is generic, but it matters. So it's not just sad or happy as a binary state, because as you go about your life and try to do things differently, figure things out, what variables might be contributing to the fact that you're sad, you're going to come up with ideas. You're going to try new and different things. Some of those are just things that you're going to think about differently or try to think about differently. Some will be things that you do differently. Some will be people that you interact with differently or less or more, or changes to the environment. But if any of it works, you need to be able to tell that. And that's very difficult to do when you're only looking at it as a binary. For one, because you're not sad all the time. And I don't mean that to be dismissive. I mean, if you were actually sad all the time, how would you know what sad meant? It would just be how you live, right? There are times when you are not. There have to have been. Otherwise, you couldn't identify when you are. If that makes sense. I hope that's clear, that I'm not trying to say you're not always sad. You're exaggerating. I'm just saying that we evaluate things in comparison to other things. So to feel tired, you must have not felt tired at some point, right? And you don't really notice it when you're not feeling these things. Because when you're not sad, when you're not tired, whatever it is that you are instead is not a problem. So why would you pay attention to it? Doesn't mean you don't notice it ever at all, but broadly, and we have research that supports this too, we just don't pay attention to things that aren't problematic for us, generally speaking. Even when we do notice those things, we don't consolidate it, meaning turning it into a long-term memory for us to be able to retrieve and access later on, generally speaking. It takes, depending on the research you're looking at, anywhere from 5 to 9 times as much time and effort and energy to encode a positive experience into long-term memory as it takes to encode a negative experience into long-term memory. So you have to explore that stuff. And we want it to be a scale, because otherwise you're mostly only noticing it when you're sad, and any intervention, anything you try to make it better make it all the way better to happy. Otherwise it didn't work. Whereas if you've got 10 levels of it and you try something, it's like, yeah, it's better. I'm still sad. I'm not as sad as I was before. I'm still way more sad than I want to be. But still, that thing worked a little bit. Might not be worth continuing to do. It might cost you more than it's worth for that improvement, but it's something. This is why we talk about aims instead of goals. If you set a goal, you either accomplish it or you don't. If you set an aim, you might hit what you're aiming at and you might not. But if you don't, there's still a difference because you get closer or further away. If I'm aiming here and I make an attempt and I don't hit here, well, where do I hit? And therefore, what adjustment can I make for the next attempt to see if it gets closer? Oh, no, that was further away. Well, that means this was better or this was worse or whatever. But it's information that if I'm just saying, did I achieve my goal? Nope, 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 nope. I'm not getting that information. I said sad because it's the first one you listed there, but tired is more useful, I think. Not useful, more common for this, where people say, I'm tired. And I tried going to bed early and that didn't work, even though it might have been that you were less tired. And I tried eating different foods and that didn't work, even though you might have been less tired. Another thing to think about is, I was going to say the nature of entropy, which is a ridiculous way to phrase what I was trying to say. Meaning you will get tired eventually. You will get sad. You will get stressed eventually. Staying out of those things is impossible to do forever. You can do everything to keep yourself energized and rested. Sooner or later, you're still going to get tired. If that wasn't the case, how would you know when it's time to rest again? You just always rest and never do anything that isn't restful. That's not great long term, generally speaking, for any individual to never do anything that pushes or stretches their boundaries, works them a little bit. You don't grow or improve if you never do anything that's difficult. I want to be very clear that this is not saying hard work makes you grow and blah, blah, blah. That stuff is true, but it leads down a slippery slope to the grind culture kind of stuff. You need to balance these things. Tired of being tired. Oh, I like that. I'm frustrated with the gap between knowing things that help and being able to do those things, even in a minute way. So actually tying this back to social anxiety as well. There's a discrepancy between your cognitive environment and your physical environment. The things that you're thinking about and the things that are actually happening are two different things. If you try to think about the things that are actually happening while they're happening, it messes it all up because you can't actually do that. Like we just showed with the example of speaking. If you try and think about it while you're doing it, you can't. You have to stop, then do, stop, then do. It interrupts it and makes everything difficult. A lot of the time, especially people with ADHD who are struggling with getting things done, it's because they're thinking about those things even while they're trying to do it. Come on, I've got to organize this thing. I've got to clean this. It's so much effort, so much cognitive effort that actually makes the task itself harder. One like ADHD hack that a client was just mentioning, I've heard it a bunch, but a client was mentioning is very helpful for them, is if there's something that you want yourself to do, put yourself in the position where you need to be in order to do that thing, or put the tool in your hand that you need to use in order to do that thing. Because if that's happening and then you start thinking about something else, then quite frequently you'll just start doing it. It's the thinking about doing it that's getting in the way. So that gap between knowing and doing is big. And with social anxiety, it comes back to the same thing. You've got to learn to identify when and to what extent it is safe to try, even if it doesn't work the way you want it to work. And then you can start getting better and better and better at making it so that you're safe in more situations and that you can try more frequently. Like I was saying about being an extrovert, at this point, the more nervous I am, probably the more that I talk instead of the less, right? Because I talk a lot. I try it a lot. I've used a lot of different phrases and a lot of different words, and I have offended and harmed people when I didn't intend to, and I learn from those situations, not perfectly, but I try harder and I forget again, and then I'll never be able to avoid it completely. But the more I try, the better I get at it. So sometimes with things like this too, it can be an all or nothing thing that like, okay, if I want to be less tired, I can go to bed early, wake up early, work out, eat differently, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, oh, all of that, that's a lot. I'm not going to be able to do all that, so why even bother? Whereas, okay, it is a lot. Maybe you can't do it all. Do the first part anyway. see what happens. That's why the scale can help, because, okay, I didn't do all of it, but I did the part where, I woke up early and now I'm just even more tired. Oh, this is the worst. But then I went to bed early that night and the next day I was a little bit better. Okay. Or I woke up early and now I'm even more tired and I didn't go to bed early. Yeah. It's a way of controlling the situation, or at least it can be. I don't want to pathologize all behavior. That, like, speaking a lot is about controlling. It can be a way to protect against things. If I'm talking, nobody else can be talking, right? So you want to increase your ability to observe when it's safe to try. You want to increase, then therefore that will give you information about what things make it so that it's safe to try or not safe to try. And you can then try and start shifting so that you're in environments and circumstances where it's safe to try more frequently, which allows you to try more frequently, which allows you to observe the results of those attempts more and gives you more information about what things work and what things don't, which means you get better at doing those things and you get better at doing things that give you better results, which means that more environments that weren't safe to try before become safe because your skill has increased, and it cycles that way. Identify where it's safe to try and try. Don't worry about whether it's going to work out or not. You can't actually figure that out in your head. It's not possible. Exactly. Actually, for quite a long time, I spent a lot of time talking with clients about reclaiming the word manipulative, that people will call you manipulative, as though there is any other version of communicating with people. What do you mean manipulative? That I'm using my words to try and evoke a certain emotional response or get you to do something? What else are words for? If you're calling someone manipulative, it means either that you don't like the specific tactics they're using in order to try and get what they're getting, like they're being deceitful or something like that. Or it just means you don't like what they're trying to get or who they're trying to get it from. But the same thing, using your words to evoke emotional responses in other people in order to get them to do something, we could call that inspiring them. If we like what they're doing, we could call it leading. We could call it educating. We could call it guiding. We could call it all kinds of things. Manipulative says more about what the person who's using that term thinks about what's happening than it does about what is actually happening. If that makes sense. Anyway, manipulative and considerate are two sides of the same coin. Yeah. Social sensitivity. You're paying close attention to people, which, back to the social anxiety, the more closely you pay attention to people. If I think somebody might be upset with me, it hits me hard. That's not a good thing. I'm not proud of it. I wish it was different. But if I think that there's a chance that somebody's disappointed in me or that somebody's unhappy and I could make them happy and I haven't, or I failed, or I tried and didn't work, it hits me hard. So I pay a lot of attention, and that makes me very anxious sometimes if I don't feel like I have a lot of confidence that I can do what the other person needs me to do. The more confident I am, the less anxious I am about it. And I'm generally fairly confident in that because I've done it a lot and it seems to work out. But I know it might not the next time, right? That scaling thing, same for the interventions on the social anxiety. Increase your ability to observe more specific, more minute changes in the thing. A very common thing is people will say fine to mean pretty much anything as long as it is survivable. How are you doing today? I'm fine. That gives no information, right? You could be like, it could be a really good day. How are you doing today? I'm fine. It could be a really terrible day and you're barely making it through. How are you doing today? I'm fine. It's not just about hiding the information from other people, though. If that's the language you use, to whatever extent you remember that experience, is going to be connected to the word fine. So how do you make something better if the best is fine? How do you distinguish between a rough day, but I'm getting through, and actually a pretty nice day if they're both fine? We want smaller buckets, more granularity in being able to observe and distinguish between different versions or different levels or different intensities of the same or similar things. Start there And then your brain will automatically start to put together correlations. You give it the data, it will come up with stuff. It's thinking about it anyway. You're thinking about it anyway. Just say, seems like even though I'm still very tired, I'm a little bit less tired when blank, or on days where blank, or whatever. And some of that, by the way, might be outside of your control. The weather might make you feel more or less tired, and there's nothing you can do about that. But if you have other things that you start to put together that make you more or less tired, more or less anxious, or socially anxious, then you can, even within the parameters of the things that you can't control, like the weather or the fact that it's a job interview or whatever, there are some things that you can control, theoretically. You want to learn more about what those things are. You can bring a fidget in with you. I fidget, and I get nervous sometimes about what that might look like to other people. Less so these days, as this is the work that I do. I will often make a point of it. But you can find fidgets like a pen. This is different than playing with a fidget cube, right? Even though for me the result is pretty similar either way, I don't worry that somebody's going to see me clicking this pen and be like, oh, he's really childish or whatever, where they might if I was playing with a fidget cube. Not that people should think that. They shouldn't. But we get nervous and anxious about it. Oh, that's that next question. What interventions can help me be comfortable in social situations where I do know the people, but I am scared I will still be judged by those closest to me? That is absolutely about repair. If they are close to you, if you know them and they are close with you, then you've got to have conversations every time something goes wrong. There is no other way. I mean, there's other things you can do to reduce your experience of anxiety, coping techniques and mindfulness, anything that's going to distract you more or less from thinking about the thing that you're doing, you'll be less anxious. But if it's about being clear and making sure, feeling safe so that you're not judged, then you watch. And if they respond in a way that makes you feel like you might be judged, you say, I'm sorry. It feels like you're judging me. Are you judging me? And if they're close with you, hopefully you have a relationship where they can say, yeah, a little bit, or no, or whatever. And you can say, okay, just because I was trying to convey this particular thing, and I know that the words I use, the way I put it out there, could be interpreted in different ways. And I'm worried that maybe I didn't get it across the way that I was trying to. What did you hear me say? What did you think I was trying to put out there? And they tell it back to you, and you say, yeah, that's about right. That's about what I was trying to say. Or say, oh yeah, no, I see why you would judge me if that's what it came across as. Sorry, let me try to say it differently so I can clarify what I mean. You have to be able to repair, because mistakes are going to happen. Miscommunication will happen. If that's the end of it, and they won't tell you. And by the way that you encourage people to do this is you do it first. That if someone says something that bothers you, you tell them instead of just sitting on it. Because if you just sit on it, then you're modeling to them, hey, when something bothers you, you shouldn't tell it to the other person. That's bad or rude or uncomfortable. So they're not going to tell you either. You start telling, and that's not always fair. Maybe it should be the other person going first. But sometimes, even though it's not fair, it's not an option to do it any other way. So you start saying, hey, let me clarify, because it kind of sounded like you just said blank, 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 which, is that what you meant to put across? Is that what you were intending for me to hear? And if they say, yeah, okay, well, I have a problem with that, and let's talk about it. If they say no, oh, okay, good, because I had a problem with that. So what were you trying to put across, right? You do that, and then they can do it, and then you feel more safe and comfortable. You've got to do it outside of your head. Just generally, with all of this stuff, a lot of different ways and techniques and suggestions to say all this stuff you're thinking about, you got to do something about it. You got to use that. And there's different reasons why you might not. There's some that really it's not safe to try, some that it's outside of your control, but you find the places where you can and do something, practice, get it out there. Try any idea you have about how to be less tired and monitor closely. What does it do? Unfortunately, we got to wrap up. I didn't get to all the questions, but that's what we talk about, that sometimes we're going to go in the direction the chat's going too. I'll say very briefly, do you need to see a therapist who specializes in social anxiety in order to get the best therapeutic treatment? No, but also I couldn't tell you what therapist you need to see instead. I will say if you're seeing a therapist for any reason, yes, you want to make sure if there's a particular thing that the therapist feels like it's within their scope, right? That if you want to see somebody for an addiction issue, you want to make sure that the therapist says, yep, that's something that I'm able to work with you on. Because there are things that, no, I don't really know how to, I don't feel comfortable working with someone who's dealing with that because it's not something I have experience or not, blah, 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 whatever. And hopefully the therapist is ethical and honest. But aside from that, the in the scope or out of scope thing, aside from that, by far the only and most important thing is that you have a good relationship with your therapist. Not that they specialize in social anxiety, that you and they have a good relationship, you communicate well. In fact, social anxiety in particular is something that even if it isn't in somebody's scope, the act of therapy, theoretically, assuming that someone's doing it well and ethically, the act of therapy is something that should be beneficial for social anxiety, no matter what we're talking. We don't have to talk about social anxiety for it to be helpful because it is social interaction, and it is safe, and it is clear and comfortable with boundaries and expectations. At least it should be all of those things. So you can experiment and develop your ability to communicate with people within those parameters. It's one of the most helpful things about therapy is that it is a place where you can practice communicating with somebody about things that are difficult to communicate about, where it is safe and secret and confidential, and you can experiment and play around and learn and develop until you start to feel like you can branch out and do it in places and in relationships that aren't as safe. Anyway, good to be with you all. We'll be here same time next week, Wednesday, 1:00 Central Time. Sorry for the interruption. And yeah, good to be with you. Thank you. Bye.